Hello again. We are Chris Lee and Chase Robinson of Southeastern 16 here to preview South Carolina's road trip to Lexington, Kentucky, Kroger Field, 3:30 Eastern, the first SEC on SEC game of the 2024 season, also the only one this week. Kentucky is about what I think about a 9.5-point favorite as
Yep.
we're doing this on Monday morning. Chase, before we get into the matchup, tell folks who sponsors the content, please.
Yep. As always, Bet Online, the world's most trusting betting platform and your number one source for everything football. Bet Online has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. Think you know your stuff? You can get in on a $200,000 mega contest. Pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200,000. When the game's over, you can go to the online casino. They got blackjack, poker, 150 slots games. So head over to the website today to get in on the action. Bet Online, the game starts here.
Let's start with the Gamecocks having the ball. And I think this side of the matchup is a big concern for South Carolina because last week the offense, 288 total yards. Lenore Sellers had under a 50% completion percentage in his first start. You had Rocket Sanders averaging 3.7 yards per carry against Old Dominion. Wanted to see how does he look healthier? Is some of that explosiveness back? Because remember, this guy was like a preseason All-American 2 years ago at Arkansas. Just wasn't what we hoped to see from the Gamecocks. Meanwhile, Kentucky, I know it was Southern Miss. I know it was a shortened game. What did they play? 3.5 quarters roughly because of the weather. But Kentucky pitches a shutout, gets a couple of picks in that game. I think anybody's watched our channel knows that I've been really high on that defense, and I thought it could be potentially a top 5 one in the league. This feels like a heavily tilted towards Kentucky side of the matchup here.
Yeah, you look at South Carolina offensively, and we've talked about Lenore Sellers. I think he's a good quarterback. This is his first big start, his first season as the guy. Shane Beamer named him the quarterback last week. There was a bit of a quarterback, battle going on in Columbia, South Carolina. Robbie Ashford sits behind Sellers. But I feel like with Sellers being the only quarterback to play on Saturday, that kind of shows that Shane Beamer does have a lot of faith in him. Didn't go to Robbie Ashford any during the game. He was 10 of 23 passing, 114 yards, no touchdowns, just averaged 5 yards per pass. So there is some concern with the South Carolina offense, and I'm not sure if they were just overlooking Old Dominion and looking ahead to Kentucky. I mean, you're in a strange situation. You have an SEC game, your second game of the season, so I'm sure they have been focused somewhat on Kentucky with it being a conference game. But I think there is some concern. There's a lot of concern for the offense of South Carolina. And just, again, Rocket Sanders not moving the ball well. And I know he's battled injury. And you look at the other running backs who got in the game on Saturday. Lenore Sellers did run some. He scored a touchdown. Jared Brown just got a touch. Oscar Attaway got 4 carries, only 5 yards. So it was really Rocket Sanders and Lenore Sellers the only ones able to run the ball on Saturday. You look at guys who we thought were going to be big-time pass catchers, and we didn't see much from them. And so and that was Old Dominion they were playing. Again, not to discredit Old Dominion. They may be a really good football team. We don't know much about them. But there's some concern for South Carolina. But I think maybe this week you do get up more for this Kentucky game. Do we see a difference? Is Lenore Sellers a little more acclimated to his starting role? But I think he's a good quarterback. From what I saw in the spring, from what we've seen in fall camp, just in the things I've read, like it's not that he's just a bad quarterback, David. No, he's a good quarterback. I think he's dynamic. I think he has a good arm. He can run himself. It's just maybe getting acclimated to the offense they're in and everything, but they just didn't look ready for that game on Saturday night.
Yeah, I think Sellers running is the wild card on this part of the matchup. Kentucky did have 2 sacks against Southern Miss for that's worth. They got guys like J.J. Weaver off the edge. They've got a very veteran front seven. I think one of the more experienced front sevens in the country when you consider how much football these guys have played. But I think if Carolina is going to get an upset or keep it closer than the number that we see on the spread is telling us. I think it's going to be Sellers' ability to get outside the pocket, scramble on third downs. Remember, he's a big guy. He's like 6'4", maybe 240-ish. That is not something that you see a lot in college football, and I think that's where Kentucky's got to be careful, is don't let him do something that beats you there.
Yeah, I mean, you have to contain a guy like him, and I know Kentucky knows that. They're going to be trying to do that. But, yeah, I think Sellers is one of those guys that if he can get loose, and maybe it just takes a game for him where he is able to do some big things, where he does get the confidence in it, and he looks like a totally different quarterback. That happens sometimes. And so, maybe that's it. But, yeah, if he's not contained, then I think he can do some damage.
Let's talk about the other side when Kentucky's got the ball. Brock Vandagriff was 12 of 18 for 169, 3 touchdowns, 1 pick. They went kind of committee in the run game, averaged 6.2 yards per carry. So I think you had to be kind of happy about that if you're Kentucky. Of course, they've got one of the better threesomes of receivers in this league, maybe in the country, with Macklin, Key, and Brown. But South Carolina has got some dudes on that side of the ball. We've talked about what they've got in at safety. They've got some experience at linebacker, got some experience up front. We really still don't know what it looks like for Brock Vandagriff against a good team. I think he threw 3 passes for Georgia last year. To me, this is the wild card side of the matchup. Is Carolina's got some guys that have made plays on that end, and we just don't really know yet. And I think we suspect that Brock Vandagriff is pretty good. We know he's got some weapons in that receiving core, and even at tight end, we know that he's got a veteran offensive line, but we don't know what it looks like for an extended sample. And so I think Saturday we start to find out.
I think so. And I think we'll find out a lot. And if the offensive line is giving Brock Vandagriff time to work, time to look downfield, and even time to break free and run, because he ran a few times Saturday night, I think that could be a big difference, because I have a lot of confidence in this offensive line of Kentucky. And so if they perform like I think they can against South Carolina, then Vandagriff's going to have a lot of time, and I think he can prove himself big time in his first SEC versus SEC game. And so I like Kentucky and kind of what they've done on offense and the receivers that they have. I think working with Vandagriff and when they're all working on the same page together, I think Kentucky's offense can be pretty good. And again, it's hard because we talked about this Kentucky game. They had the delay and they didn't finish the game. It was a weird game, and so there's a lot going against them there. The weather wasn't great, and so it's kind of hard to gauge what we see, I feel like, from Saturday night from Kentucky.
The other part that I find intriguing is, how does Kentucky run the ball against Tonka Hemingway and that front seven? I think Trainum's still out on this one. I can't remember. I don't know if we've got an update. We're doing this Monday morning, but I mean, that's a place where, like, if you get Kentucky in 3rd and long, cut down the play sheet, make it more predictable. That's a place, like, again, I could see Carolina making it kind of interesting when Kentucky's got the ball, because there are some questions here.
There are, yes. But, and Chris, we've spent a lot of time talking about the South Carolina defense in the offseason and some of these names they have. And you mentioned one, Tonka Hemingway, a guy we've talked a lot about. He had a lot of preseason love and hype around him. And then you've got, Debo Williams and these guys who we know are good defensive players. And Debo Williams had 7 total tackles, 5 solo the other night against Old Dominion. But yeah, the defense they didn't look as good as we thought they could the other night against Old Dominion. They were able to move the ball on them, score 19 points on them. And so there is some concern with the South Carolina defense. And again, when you're facing, I feel like a team like Kentucky, we're breaking in a new quarterback. Maybe South Carolina has some different things they're going to throw at Kentucky that they didn't against Old Dominion and things like that. But there is some concern on the South Carolina defense. They need some of these guys who's got some preseason hype to step up at this point, because it's a big week this week for South Carolina.
All right, let's get to picks. Who do you like and why?
I'm going to go with Kentucky. There's just too many questions on South Carolina, too many concerns after their opening week, and again, things may change. They may look like a totally different team against Kentucky, but I think Kentucky is in a position where they're going to win some big games this year because their defense is good to me, is really good, and so I think when you have an offense that's learning, it may take them a little bit longer to look really good, but I think their defense is going to keep them in a lot of games. Way too many concerns for South Carolina. I've got the Wildcats.
Yeah, I feel like Carolina's going to show up better this week. I really do. I feel like Shane Beamer's teams always compete. You see some teams that look dreadful week one, and week two looks a lot different. You got the nerves out if you're Lenore Sellers, maybe. But also, I just think I got a lot of questions. It's on the road. When I'm in doubt, I usually pick the home team. They still haven't really shown you that they can throw the ball downfield capably. And I guess you could say the same thing with Kentucky, to be fair. Although the perception is they've got the more polished passer in this if you go by recruiting rankings and those kind of things. But I just feel like the more questions after week one are on South Carolina's side. Kentucky's at home. It just feels like a big spot to ask Lenore Sellers to come in there and deliver a win with their running game not being more effective than it was in week one.
Yeah, and I feel like playing a conference game the second week of the season is tough anyway, but to go from a poor performance this past week now to have to play in an SEC game, that's a lot for a new quarterback. So I'll be interested to see how he adjusts to that because that's kind of a tough spot to me.
Yeah, we'll take the Wildcats in this one. We'll be back to recap it probably sometime Saturday night as we do our weekly wraparound. After most of the games have been played on Saturday night, best way to get that, hit that subscribe button, hit that like one. If you want to advertise here, we reach millions of viewers a year. Caroline.smith at Southeastern14.com. For Chase Robinson, I am Chris Lee. This is Southeastern 16, presented by Bet Online.